Hello, everyone. We are live today with Alan Willett, author of Leading the Unleadable and international consultant. He has worked with companies ranging from one to some of the giants such as Microsoft and NASA. So we are in good hands today with our topic on leading with intention. And I'm just going to start out with letting Alan give a little background about himself and maybe talk about his book a little bit if he wants to give you guys some perspective here.
Oh, okay. Sure. I am Alan Willett. A little bit about me. So, as Bo said, I am an author. I'm a speaker. I'm a consultant. I get to do all those fun things, and I get to travel the world, meddling all over the place. I mean, making things better. I like stirring things up. What people have deemed me as the master of the friction point. I just love it when there's conflict in organizations. There's people that have gone a little bit awry, and I help get things not just straightened out, but use the heat from that friction to turn it into something much more powerful, into innovation. So there's a little bit about me. Any other questions along those lines, Bo, before I go?
If you wanted to maybe define what you mean by friction point for some people who maybe aren't familiar with that term.
Oh, sure. Um, so let's see. A friction point is where, if you're rubbing sandpaper onto wood, there's friction. It causes heat, causes sawdust, etc. And there's a lot of work these days where people are saying we should have a friction-free workplace where there's no conflict, things like that. And that's ridiculous. We need friction. If you didn't have friction, if you lived in a snowy place where there's ice, for example, you probably hit icy patches where your car no longer has friction with the road. You can't make it around a corner. You slide in unpredictable directions. You need friction. So friction helps you really stay on track. And when you have friction as well, conflict between people, it's really because there's diverse ideas coming together with passion. And if you can take those ideas and focus them better, you get innovation. So did that describe it well enough for you, Bo?
Yes, I love your emphasis there on diverse perspectives because that definitely creates the best innovation comes from, total people with all kinds of different views from different walks of life. And so I think that definitely, can also become a point of friction too, whenever, of course, as you mentioned, whenever you have so many different people with different perspectives. But then, the other side of that is it can be extremely innovative and awesome ideas are born from that environment.
If it's led well.
Yes, no, that's a huge part of it. So that,
Because it can either become destructive conflict, or constructive conflict. So that's what I really work on, is making sure that we transform the destructive situations into constructive situations.
yeah, a lot of times it leads to bumping heads if, like you mentioned, if it's not led correctly, and we see that a lot in the scientific community here. You have people with different, maybe in different schools of thought on issues, and sometimes that it can get pretty heated, and a lot of times there isn't any intentional leadership going on, so it ends up being just a point of contention and arguing and never really gets resolved, and where it could have gone a completely different way had there been a little nudge in the right direction. So
Well said. Well said.
we will, I kind of think, jump into our first question here, which is pretty basic, but I think it gives you the opportunity to really help give people some understanding of maybe where they're going wrong in leadership. And that is, what are a few common errors you see leaders making with their people?
Okay. Uh, hmm. Well, I think there's three basic ones we'll go to, and I really won't call them errors, but missed opportunities, if you will.
That's better. I like it.
Uh, for one, people really do need guidance or feedback. This is, like I said, friction. It's useful. It helps you keep you on the road. It gives you guidance if you're going off track. If you're suddenly off the road into a field, you kind of want to know that. So, and leaders really need to be able to give feedback more often, more constructively to people. And one of the things I have found, let me back up a step. Let me tell you why I wrote the book. That cool?
Yes, I would love to hear that.
Um, I ran into a lot of situations in my consulting and throughout my career, even before consulting, where managers, leaders are just simply people, and they don't like conflict any more than most people do. And they perceive that if somebody's doing something off pace, out of kilter, that confronting them on that is going to cause conflict. And they want to just hope it goes away. So many times I'm seeing leaders wait way too long to give feedback. And by the time they give feedback, they're too angry to do it constructively, or they just fire the person. And that's a huge missed opportunity because so I really was looking at this, and some people pointed out that I had a gift for challenging them on these areas. So I actually did write some short papers, and that eventually led me to writing the book. And the point I want to make is cynics, divas, mavericks, the subtitle you saw in the book, Managing Cynics, Divas, Mavericks, and Other Troublesome Folks, is they all have great gifts. You want them in your organization. Like, for example, mavericks push the boundaries. They do not accept the status quo. They're always looking to get the next best thing, the innovation. They're not happy with where things are right now. Do you know a couple mavericks yourself?
Oh, definitely.
I expect you might be one yourself.
Maybe.
Yes. And by the way, you also need cynics. People are surprised by that one. But I'm a type of person who has thousands of ideas all the time, and some of them are so blue sky they don't connect to the ground. And there's some people that are naturally just good at picking apart ideas and showing where they're missing a grounding in reality. And you need those people to make sure your plans are rational and valid. And but mavericks or cynics, either one of them can go over a red line and start being disruptive to the organization. So, coming back to your question, one of the problems I see is people not given the proper guidance, for example, to maverick cynics or divas, to keep them on the correct side of the red line. And when they go over that red line and start causing disruption to an organization, they need to give them feedback. So the most common error, number one, is not giving that feedback at the proper time. Number two is not knowing how to give that feedback. So, and I actually have a whole chapter dedicated to well, actually, three chapters dedicated to that in the book. One chapter is called something about getting the radar for trouble, which is actually learning as a leader how to spot that trouble early so you can make the early correction because it's a lot easier to correct it when it's early. Number two is how to give that feedback to really help people hear it and it lead to a positive difference because that is an absolute amazingly difficult skill, but fairly easy to master once you have the parts down to it.
I was gonna say that that takes a little special talent there.
Yeah, I can talk about that if you like. And the other chapter is building a bridge to a successful change. Because sometimes all you got to do is give people the right feedback and a miraculous change. Over the weekend, I've had this happen more than once where I've either guided people to give the feedback or given the feedback myself. And by Monday, they internalized it and said, I'll do better. And they do. But sometimes uh, there's a whole system enabling that person to keep doing the bad behavior. And then you need to build a bridge to transformation. And there's some extra steps you have to do there. So to me, that whole part of the book is really focused on one of those common errors, not dealing with the problems early and not dealing with them effectively. Do you have any questions on that?
Yeah, I think I'd like to hear a little bit, maybe a little bit more of an example of how somebody would handle this in a way that is not not productive, and then how someone who knows what they're doing, has a little bit of training, could do this in a way that would lead to totally different results.
Okay, sure. Um, for example, look at sorry, you have a team that you've launched, and they're really working on a really critical thing they have to create for for the for their customers, for the business, and it's just not doing what they're committed to do. They're not putting the hours in. They're not getting the things done. And as a leader, you're under great pressure. How do you feel?
Yeah, no,
How
I
would you
don't
feel?
really, well, under pressure, so I'm trying to stressed out, I guess would be,
Yeah,
um,
and you might
like,
even be angry at the person.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely
It gets
would.
personal.
Yeah, really, if you think about it, really high pressure situations, and a lot of managers are, they're under high pressure situations. So when people are going off track, they get angry, they get upset because all of a sudden they're being beat up by their managers or their clients or the board of directors, anyone you look at. And anybody in leadership position is going to be feeling that great pressure, especially if they made a commitment. And there's just one person dragging everything down. So there's two ways to go. Well, there's a lot of ways to go, but let's just do two simple ones. Uh, you can yell at the person
It's always so productive.
and put on more pressure and just, I've seen people do this, berate them for about a half an hour. Not, it might make a temporary difference. So the other way to do is to do the steps in the book I talk about. I won't take you through all of them because there's a few, but basically, to remove judgment is the very first thing because you actually don't ever know what's going on with somebody. You never know what their motives are. All you know is that what the behavior is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's huge. Don't make assumptions. That's what I always say.
Yeah, and it's even more than that. To me, it's don't make assumptions and really work to completely remove the judgment you have.
Yeah.
Recognize your anger, but try to get rid of the anger, get rid of the judgment. Because if you think about it, when you're angry, you're thinking the person is usually that comes from fear, or you believe the person's trying to harm you somehow. Is anybody actually working in a business trying to harm the business? Unlikely. Are
Yeah.
they trying to harm the project? Unlikely. There's something going on. And when in the book, I describe the situation where the leader, when they walked through these steps I suggested, they realized the person had been performing very well in the past. So what I say is to get rid of the judgment, get rid of the emotion, and be able to deliver your concern, your message in 2 minutes or less. And you can actually do it under 1 minute most of the time. But in this case, the leader, she sat the person down and said, "Hey, whatever the person's name was, let's say Joe. Joe, you made these commitments. I've been kind of upset, I have to admit, because they're not being done. It puts the whole team in jeopardy. But I'm mostly concerned about you. What's happening?" And then you just wait. Now, the majority of time, what you find out is there's something else going on. In this specific case I'm talking about, it turns out the person was going through a very difficult family time. They were getting a divorce, and he was trying to keep it secret from the leader, the team, and everybody else. And he realized that it was a disservice to everybody. And he went and apologized to the team. The team gathered around him and offered all sorts of support, and that they really helped him. And the person actually started to deliver and change how he was doing the work. He now had the support, it was in the open. He was able to get his work done, and people were able to help him. The team got back on track. So look at the two different ways it could have went.
Yeah, that, yeah, definitely would have taken it in a totally different direction had he been approached, with, as you mentioned, judgment and had been yelled at or anything. And I think that's just something I've always tried to understand. I'm like, I think that's more of a, old 80s, 90s movies where you see the boss yelling at people. But I guess in today's time, there probably are still bosses that take that approach and leaders who take that approach. But
Oh,
it's just crazy.
well, actually, there might have been an overcorrection. There is still leaders that yell, etc. But there's too often leaders that do not provide the feedback in a way that's heard, in a way that leads to positive change.
Yeah.
So that's a, you see what I mean? That's a different problem. So
Yeah, because they can not say anything at all.
they
Or,
keep the anger internally.
yeah.
Uh, so that's what one of the other chapters of the book is called Remove or Improve, which is about when you get to a certain point, you're under that pressure, you may have to remove somebody. But how do you decide whether you remove or improve them? And that is a very useful chapter. But what I really encourage people to do is look earlier. So let me tell you the other common error. I might be going too long on this one question,
No,
but
you're fine.
the other common error that I've seen is that people don't feel like they can provide feedback because they've neglected to do something different, which is what I would call preventive measures. So the first part of the book is really about reacting to problems, but the second part is actually more important to me, which is designing your leadership to prevent the kind of problems that do come up on teams. And there's three major areas to this. One is making sure that people understand what the purpose is of their group and that they're on a mission. Even if it's a mission to close down a division, that's a, a noble mission to do it in style, to give people the opportunity to learn from their work, to grow better, to engage into the work in a way that's meaningful to each one of them and to the organization as a whole. So to me, I say people have a need for mountains, and we as leaders have to provide them with the mountains to climb. Does that make sense, or do you need some more detail on that?
No, that makes sense. That was a good explanation.
So if there's a purpose, there's still another part, which is you have to set clear expectations of excellence. Um, I do a lot of work in the land of product development, software, hardware products, etc. And the number one question leaders always ask is about schedule. Does that surprise you?
No, not at all.
But what's their real number one concern? Their real number one concern is to make sure they're absolutely focused on the customer, to make sure they're focused on providing the best value they can in the shortest time possible. So a lot of times when they're focusing on schedule, they're really saying, you're going as fast as you can. They really should get much clearer about their expectations of excellence. So, like in this case, what I really suggest is you make it clear. Number one priority is to making sure you're building something the customer will love. And there's some techniques out there. You might have heard about minimal viable product.
I haven't. No.
Okay, or minimum valuable product. That's something that came in with the lean startup. And what I have found, a lot of organization overreacted to this and they started to build the minimal boring product,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
which is they looked at the least thing they could do to make it a little bit better, but that's boring. You
Uh-huh.
really want to focus on making something good for the users, good for your service, the people you're providing a
Yeah.
service to.
Focus on solving their problems, and there you go.
Right. Number two is give me options to go as fast as possible. So that's, by the way, not saying give me a schedule that's fantasy. I want to know what the way to go their fastest is. Like to go from here to from where I'm in Ithaca, New York, to where you are. Where are you in Kansas?
Manhattan, Kansas.
Yeah. So the fastest way to get there, let me see, driving or flying or perhaps having a helicopter at my disposal or a fighter jet at my disposal to get there, uh, wheels up to wheels
You
down,
dream.
30 minutes. Uh, in my dreams, correct. However, that is what I believe managers need to ask for. Tell me what are the fastest options you know of, and then go past those and what could I pay for? And then the manager has an opportunity to choose. It could be that important that I get to Manhattan, Kansas that quickly. I can't think of a scenario right now why, but there could be one.
Big game. Maybe that's why.
So that's what I mean, though. I think managers really got to be clear about their expectations. Mad focus on the customer value. Give me the fastest ways to get there, and then give me a commitment you can keep. Because almost all the projects that I have seen leaders, they deliver late until I work with them to figure out the difference between really aggressive, fastest, smartest option between a commitment we can keep. They're two different things. So, number two, set clear expectations of excellence. Number three, follow through on your clear expectations of excellence. Because you can set those expectations, then if all you do is ask about schedule, you've blown your expectations of excellence.
Yes, I really like your emphasis on, setting expectations because I see that's a really simple fix that a lot of times gets overlooked. And it's so important that people know what is expected of them. Or like you said, then how do you give feedback if you've never even clearly explained what it is you're expecting? Um,
Right. So to
could be
flip
a
this now,
predicament.
to wrap this question up, flipping it around, you're gonna you can prevent a lot of people problems. You can by doing this, having a clear purpose in mind for your teams, setting clear expectations of what excellence means to you as a leader, doing great follow through, and finally, reacting when people are off track, keeping an eye on things, and giving them the feedback to keep them on the rails.
Yeah, those are perfectly summarized there, how easily fix some of those things. We'll move into our next question. You kind of spoke about this earlier when you mentioned friction points, but the decision-making process is sometimes a point of contention in a lot of organizations. So how can we make this process more efficient?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, Let me give you an example of something that was done horribly as a decision making process. A manager was going to said to the group, "Hey, we're contemplating moving offices. I would like everybody to put together your ideas and let's make a decision." And the people in the organization believed that she had given them the authority to make a decision. So they went off and did a lot of research and they were working hard at it. And she came back less than 2 weeks later to say, okay, we're going to move and here's where we're going to move.
Oh, yeah. They didn't appreciate that, I'm sure.
Blind fury. It didn't matter that what she picked was kind of where they were headed. It didn't matter if she picked the same thing they were going to pick or not. They were completely furious. By the way, if she told the group, she said, I'm going to make a decision about whether we're going to move, and I'm going to do so, give me some input, they would have been fine with that.
A totally different totally different perspective there.
So there's really two parts to this that I think are the most important things to making decision making efficient. Number one, really critical, as a leader, always be clear what style you're going to be using for making a decision. And there's four major styles. There's some subtle details in underneath so you could break it into more parts. But number one is I'm going to make a decision. You're not getting any input into it. I'll let you know when I've decided. There's clarity. I think you should use that one least often, but you have to do that as a leader occasionally.
Yeah.
Number two, I'm going to make a decision. I would value your input. I want it as passionately as you can give it to me, but be clear. I'm going to make the decision. Again, less often than perhaps the other ones, but again, as a leader, that's a very wise decision making path. If you're going to, if you are accountable for the group and you have to land the plane, that is a true example, by the way. It turns out that pilots that seek input from everybody else in the cockpit before they make their decision make much better decisions than those pilots that don't ask anybody's opinion.
Yeah.
So, but it is their decision. And you wouldn't want it. I don't believe you want it any other way.
Yeah.
Let's take let's get consensus.
Yeah.
Okay, we are going to make this together and we're going to make it via consensus, which is what that leader implied the office move was going to be. And you absolutely can do decisions by consensus. I'll talk a little bit more about that. By the way, I prefer consensus, a little nuance. I prefer consensus with a deadline.
Yeah.
Uh, and number four is delegate to the group or the individual. And it's up to them whether they do it by consensus or benevolent dictatorship, etc. But you can delegate. And you have when you delegate, you got to give absolutely clear boundaries. Like if there's going to be an office move, you got to be clear about it's up to you. Here's the boundaries. Here's how much budget you have. Here's the geographic locations. Here's other things. And I have to review it to see if there's anything missing from the boundaries I gave you. But there you go. That makes sense. Number one, two, three, four. Make
Yes.
your boundaries clear. Make it clear what kind of decision it is and who's going to make it. That really, I see that done so wrong so often, and making that clear makes things go a lot better. Number two on the decision making, I think is really important. Is people often now are trying to do consensus made decisions, and they're horrible at it. Have you seen this at all?
Yeah, so actually we have a really culturally diverse team. So that's been something we've had to learn is just the different styles, like you were mentioned, if it's consensus based and in some cultures they'll, or organizations even maybe specifically versus culture, they want
Yeah.
consensus on something as small as what time to have a meeting or,
Oh
things
my
like that.
gosh.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's inefficient. It wastes time in a lot of ways.
it is. And also, so here's the problems, by the way. One is what you just said is um, somebody should be making it clear on like where we go to lunch isn't consensus. maybe,
Yeah.
maybe it has to be. I don't know. But let's be clear what I'm saying. A lot of times, teams just bump around trying to get everybody to agree.
Uh-huh.
And that's not consensus, that's concurrence. But let's be clear, people should have training on consensus, on what it is and how to do it. There's lots of techniques, and the better methodologies you have, the better it works. I really wish our government did consensus because I live in actually a consensus based community. I do a lot of consensus work. And when it's done well, in which it can be done well, it works so much better. It produces much more innovation, much better ideas, much better building of community and trust, and so much less tear down. But people need two things: they need training and they need clear methodologies.
Yeah, those are huge. And in Japan, they have a really interesting system for consensus-based decisions for big organizations. So I think it's called the Rumi system. If you're ever interested in looking that up, but it does work extremely effectively. And there, if you know what you're doing, if you're from outside that culture and you try to step in and you don't really know how it works, you can,
I'm aware.
have all kinds of trouble. So
I've studied a lot of different forms of consensus making. I'm fine with any of them. Well, I gotta say, can't say any, but most of them. Uh, what it really means is this is what I mean, though. You said an organizational culture, or there needs to be an understanding and a training of how it works, and that
definitely,
training needs refreshing periodically.
yeah, that's a great point.
And consensus with a deadline is a good idea, by the way.
It is. It's great. It works really well. Not for scheduling meetings or lunch, but big decisions and innovation.
Well, you could actually do it. We have 5 minutes to reach a consensus of where we're going to lunch. If we don't have consensus, I decide. Go.
Oh, so my parents used to always do this, and then they just cause all the children to argue, and then they'd be annoyed we're arguing, and I'm like, stop asking us where you want to eat and just pick, and
There
you'll
you
avoid
go.
this whole argument.
There you go.
That's great. So I guess, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that, or?
I think that's sufficient for now.
Okay, yeah, it really points out some really important parts to consider. So our next question here, let's see if I can get it to work. How do you transform organizational friction points into innovation? So I guess we kind of touched on this, but if you have anything else you'd like to add or go, elaborate a little further
Oh,
here.
sure. I know you like memes. So,
Too.
eh, have you ever seen that Johnny Depp in Pirates of the Caribbean looking over his shoulders to see the enemy coming over the horizon, and this big grin on his face?
Yes.
I love that because um, to me, leaders have to learn to just embrace friction, to just say, oh my gosh, here's a great opportunity to really shake things up. When they see people arguing, passionate, and engaged in even in destructive conflict, it's wow, that just lights me up because it says, all right, there's some real fire here, there's some real passion. So the number one thing is, I think you people are afraid of it because they don't have the good techniques for handling it. So I'll give you three things. Number one, embrace friction. By the way, one of my new websites is called embracefriction.com. I'm working with a marketing genius from the West Coast there, Linda Popke, and we're really working at putting together various offerings and methodologies for actually how to embrace friction and how to uh, what we call set it on fire. That's going to be a new ebook we'll have out there. It's probably in December. about really how do you up the level of friction in your organizations to create more innovation, more features.
Awesome. Yeah, I've checked it out. I like it. Yeah,
Oh,
sounds
cool.
fun.
Yeah. So number one, embrace friction. Look forward to it. Number two, get good at it. And there's two key techniques I'll have here. Number two then is learn how to turn down the heat. Before you can get people to engage in constructive friction, you got to get them off the destructive path. And this often means getting people to understand their different cultural backgrounds or educational backgrounds, etc. I mentioned that I do a lot of work in high tech. So sometimes the people from marketing and the engineers are passionately not liking each other.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
Yes, but if you look at it, where they come from, engineers have a completely different educational background. They often have a completely different, like Myers Briggs type indicator. They're they're so different, and
Uh-huh.
they're actually rewarded differently for different things. I could go really deep on this, but you can see it in my ebook soon.
Awesome.
Um,
I love that stuff. It's really fascinating.
but the thing is, once I got the marketing people and the engineers to see their differences and to embrace those differences, I turned down the heat. But then you have to refocus the heat. You got to get the heat back. You got to get the fire there. Focus that friction, focus the fire into the common goal. So marketing and engineers, for example, had really different goals. Marketing was very mercurial, if you will. They were more focused on quick wins, quick features, different kind of reward and recognition. They want to hit the marketplace fast. Engineers are being held accountable to long-term solutions. They're accountable for making commitments they can keep and beat. They want to build a foundation and keep building it. So they really had different reward systems and different goals. So we put them to have a common goal, which is really to innovate faster than the competition, to innovate faster than that competition with their features, etc. And they had to come up with common methodologies on how to work together on this. They got passionate again, but now they were passionate toward a common goal. There were still arguments, but the arguments ended with them going out for beers together. It was much better.
Yeah. That that's huge. We have kind of the same issue here in the higher education system with scientists and the the communications people, and it's
Oh,
quite interesting.
yes, absolutely. Bo, I've worked with them too. I've worked with both those in academia and research and development, and the primary investigators versus the teams that work with them versus the communication specialist.
Yep.
Whoa, they talk completely different languages. They
Yes.
have completely different reward and recognition systems. They have completely different backgrounds they come from, and it's so fun to get them to work together.
Yeah, we could use probably a little bit of help there. We're getting there, but it takes a lot of time for sure.
Let me know who to talk to. I'm happy to help you. I
You're
love
talking to
embracing. All right. Well, let's talk more, Bo. What do you need?
her. Yeah,
Ask me some more questions.
all kinds of stuff. Oh my! If I derail us on this, we'll never get off the topic.
Up to you. You're the leader on this.
We may come back around to that if we have enough time. Um,
Okay.
the next question I thought was interesting because I think a lot of people sometimes don't think of leadership in terms of fear and stuff, but it's here. I'm gonna get it pulled up before I ask here.
Are you going to go to the fun factor? Oh, yes, you are.
Here we go.
Fear. Fear on
Yep,
something without. That's called FUD.
exactly. I
FUD.
saw that. I saw that. I didn't put it on there as fun because I was like, well, they're gonna not know what it means, so I'm just gonna go ahead and write it out. So, how explain how leaders let fear, uncertainty, and doubt get in their way and in the way of their team.
All right. Um, huh.
They never do
Uh,
that, of course. Huh?
no, no. You're right though. Yeah. Here's a quick story to start this out. I once was talking to a manager who was really just upset, especially about this one meeting that they go to. It was horrible. They have to attend it every week. And I kept asking questions, and she about what was going wrong, and she would tell me about how people would just go off track. There was rarely an agenda, things like this. And I said, wow, that's awful. Who's responsible for this meeting? And she stared at me for about a minute and then said, oh, I am.
Oh my goodness. Revelation.
Let me tell you, this has happened a lot after that first time. I
Wow.
discover that times uh, leaders haven't accepted the fact that they have to lead. And I think some of that comes from some self esteem issues, and some of it comes from they don't want to step on other people's toes. So, actually, one of the early chapters in my book is what I call the leadership crisis point, which is where leaders come to the realization that they are responsible for things and that they do have to lead. And it's a really different mindset. So, in that leader's case, it really was a recognition that she had to take ownership of this thing that she didn't feel ownership of before. She had to actually stand in front of the room and take control of the room and make decisions, do the things, all the things we talked about earlier. She had to step up and do. And that was new for her. It is for a lot of leaders. They get put in management positions, doesn't mean they know how to lead. They know how to manage, perhaps, but it doesn't mean they know how to lead.
That's an all too common problem.
It is. So the good news is, with some coaching, people can really step up and do this. It's really a different way of thinking. So the distinction I like to make for people is the difference between good management and exceptional leadership. And exceptional leadership can be really messy compared to good management, but it's exceptional. It's
Yeah.
fantastic because they're always pointing the a way to something inspiring and motivating. Even if it's messy getting there, people will go with them. They'll follow them. Good management can be well organized. Um, you get your quarterly reports done on time. You get all your weekly reports in, and it can be extraordinarily boring, and people will leave it in droves.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So, exceptional leadership is really about uh, a higher level calling. And I really encourage people to understand those differences and accept the call to exceptional leadership.
Yeah, that's yeah, really interesting once you start studying a little bit more and into that and defining really the difference between just management and leadership. And one thing I always joke about, but it's true, is that a lot of people get into business because they're good at baking cakes or something,
Yes.
and so they start a cake business and then they're put in charge of leading their team and leading a team of people, and they have no idea. They bake cakes. That's what they know. So it's kind of funny, but it requires some definite intention and studying or getting some help and consulting or
Yeah.
finding Alan Willett and
No.
getting your way there.
Oh, absolutely. One of my favorite things to do is coaching and mentoring, and there's a bit of a difference between the two. But I'm getting more and more people that tap me on the shoulder from individuals that are doing similar to cake baking businesses, believe it or not, to executives in big companies that want some coaching on how to lead more effectively, how to lead more inspirationally, how to lead more exceptionally. So I'm really enjoying that work very much.
Did you have anything else you wanted to mention? I think that's the last question I had. So if there was any other things that you think would be really relevant and help people with, feel free to
Oh, sure.
share.
Couple things. One is my next area of study. The next book I'm working on is called Leading with Speed.
Leading with speed.
So,
That one.
and I'll just talk a little bit about this. So I don't even have a publication date yet. So I'm promoting this book way in advance, but I'm really excited about this. And my website, alanwillett.com, has a lot of the workshops I do in this area. So I actually can promote those. Uh, but what I'm excited about with leading with speed is three things. One is there's a lot of pressure these days for faster, faster, faster. Have you ever felt that?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Everything is moving so much faster with technology and everything.
right. And here's the first thing I really work on with people is faster to where, faster why. Because a lot of times people are trying to go faster without a clear definition of what a win would mean. And I really think that's important. For example, I said, faster, innovate faster than the competitor. Somebody came to me with a long list of issues, and I looked at their issues and I said, I don't understand. I see that these are annoyances or some observations, etc., or symptoms, but I don't understand why it's important. And we had to work for a good couple hours before it came down to we need to innovate faster than our competitors. That wiped out their long list of wines. Sorry, wine. They were wine. And we replaced it with a different list of here's what the obstacles were to innovating faster than the competition. So they were trying to go faster, but they were trying to go, the actions they were looking at were not going to help them. They had to be clear about what their goal of speed was. And that's so critical. That makes sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Say, so number two is um, I look at I've been looking at this in two different ways. Number two is once we understand what our goal for speed is, we look at what are the barriers to speed, and we start to eliminate them. Uh, Let me just give one example there. I can give you 20, but one example is interruptions. Um, People are interrupt driven completely these days. How many different instant messaging apps do you have, Bo? By just yourself?
Well, do like 2 or 3 probably.
2 or 3, yeah. Plus, there's the phone, plus there's
Oh,
email,
yeah.
plus there's people knocking on the door. We're really become an interrupt-driven society. But there's a lot of data on this that I've gathered and others have gathered. If you just get a few interrupt-free hours a week, your productivity skyrockets. And the number one interrupter is, of course, you interrupting yourself. So it's really getting a discipline around interruptions can actually remove one of the barriers to your speed. And I have a lot more examples to that. Some of the things we talked about earlier, by the way, is also examples of that. But then the other part that I'm looking at hard is accelerators to speed, because once we eliminate those things, we're going faster, but can we go faster yet? And we can. A lot of times, people need to be able to instrument their processes better so they understand where the barriers are. So, actually, with little data, let's call this, there's big data that's really helping, but you can have little data, even at the personal level, to help you understand where your biggest opportunities for speed improvements are. And you can go faster and faster yourself toward that big goal. So, number one, know why you want to go faster. Number two, start to eliminate the barriers. Number three, look for accelerants.
Yeah, that's huge. I think I'm really excited to see this book come out, and I'll have to check it out once it's released. And I have included the links to your website here. I'll go ahead and bring those up so people
Oh,
can
awesome.
go and follow you, and then they'll know whenever that book comes out. I'm sure you'll be promoting on that, so they'll be able to find it. So
So, when you're ready, I have a couple closing notes, but do you have any closing questions or comments?
I don't think so, other than this has been really interesting. And I think, just the few, well, not few, but the tips that you gave that are pretty simple can make a huge impact. So I think that's, great to have some of those tips from you.
Oh, you're welcome. A pleasure to do so.
Yeah. Yeah. So feel free if you have some closing notes.
So, my closing note, I talked about exceptional leadership. And I really believe there's a number of aspects to exceptional leadership. But the number one I like to close with often is that I believe that we're here to do good in the world. And I think exceptional leaders really focus on that. They try to do good for the community, they try to do good for the people that work for them, Even if it means remove them from the organization, they do so in a way that's humane. So I really encourage people to do good in the world. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I love that. I actually saw in another one you had, you mentioned your eye on the true prize. And I think that's awesome way of putting it in, you know. Yeah, if you're trying to solve problems in a genuine uh, concern to solve problems, you're better things are gonna come to you, and the way you approach things will just be totally different. So
Bo, a true pleasure. I love meeting you. Thank you.
yes, it was so great meeting you. Thank you so much for taking time. I know you're busy, so I won't keep you much longer. And I'll get a video sent to you soon. Well, this video sent to you after I've made some edits. So,
Terrific. Thank you,
all right.
Bo.
Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.
And we're no longer live. Masha,